Petitions. They have not been paid their dues, totaling to 3.5 billion. That during the season of 2017-2018, the National Cereals and Produce Board committed over 11 billion in strategic food reserves for maize purchases, out of which 7 billion was dispersed to National Cereals and Produce Board from strategic food reserve accounts for payment to farmers, leaving an outstanding balance of about 3.5 billion. That the aforementioned money was never paid to the farmers and instead was irregularly dispersed to certain individuals and traders who are not intended beneficiaries. That farmers are decrying the fact that the delayed payments have been made it difficult for them to meet their financial obligations. For instance, purchase of farm inputs like fertilizers, maize seeds, among other essentials. That the increased cost of farm inputs like fertilizers have forced farmers to reduce acreage under the crop, hence posing a threat to the country's food security. That in the recent past, farmers have become victims of cartels and exploitation by middlemen. For instance, the government purchased subsidized fertilizers to be sold to farmers through the National Cereals and Produce Board, and the same never got to the farmers, but instead was irregularly sold to unscrupulous middlemen. That efforts to have these matters addressed by the relevant authorities have been futile, and that none of the issues raised in the petition is pending in any court of law, constitutional or legal body. Therefore, your humble petitioners pray that the National Assembly, through the Departmental Committee on Agriculture and Livestock, causes National Cereals and Produce Board to speedily pay farmers their dues. Number two, causes National Cereals and Produce Board to put in place mechanisms of registering all farmers for ease of payments and supply of farm inputs. Number three, makes any other direction it deems fit in the circumstances of this matter. And your petitioners will ever pray. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Endebess.
Honorable Speaker, I want to support this petition by the Honorable Alfred Keter, member for Nandi Hills. Honorable Speaker and members, the farmers in the North Rift and particularly even my county of Trans Nzoia, we delivered our maize to the National Cereals and Produce Board last year in the month of November, October, and even December up to January. These farmers depend on that money for payments. The Ethics and Anti-Corruption wrote a letter to the National Cereals and Produce Board to stop any further payment as the matter was being investigated. Mr. Speaker, when Ethics and Anti-Corruption writes a letter to stop any further payment until investigations are complete, we don't know when the investigations are going to be complete. These farmers depend on that money that they get from selling their produce to the cereals for payments of their school fees for their children, for plowing their lands, and for their other basic needs. We expected, if there are issues of corruption within the National Cereals and Produce Board, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption should have come with a list of the suspects that stop payment to these suspects until we clear with them. But not all the farmers, because you cannot suspect all the farmers. A small-scale farmer who has delivered his 50 bags or 10 bags to the cereals cannot be a suspect in an investigation. So, Honorable Speaker, we urge the House and more so the Committee on Agriculture to take this matter very seriously on behalf of the farmers of the North Rift. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Ugunja. You are putting your request.
Well, the Speaker, because you have actually called me out, let me just make a comment. So, Speaker, I totally agree with the petition as presented by Honorable Alfred Keter. So, Speaker, I recall that my committee did engage on this matter, albeit briefly or peripherally, 2 months ago. But currently it sits squarely and rightfully under the Committee on Agriculture. The Speaker, it is not conceivable that the government, which has clearly, through the NCPB, received maize from small-scale farmers in broad daylight, can fail to pay for this maize on whatever grounds. The Speaker, it is incumbent on any responsible government that it goes out, even if there's no money, to look for whatever money it can find to pay these farmers as a matter of urgency. Mr. Speaker, how we treat our farmers, and more so small-scale maize farmers, is a testimony to how we regard ourselves as citizens. Mr. Speaker, very soon, these maize farmers are going to suffer the fate of the sugarcane farmers of Western Kenya. And it's a time this House put its feet down to ensure that the right thing is done and on time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. But I thought you were saying that even if there is no money, to look for any money. So I was wondering, how do the two
Mr. Speaker, you know, there's some money which is strange in this country.
Imperial Primary School, Kitutu Chache, I don't know whether it's north or south, Kisii County. St. Green Hill Academy, Kitutu Chache, again Kisii County. St. Joseph Holy Angel Primary School, Galole constituency, Tana River County. St. Mary's Primary School, Garissa Township, Garissa County. Luuma Primary School, Tigania East constituency, Meru County. Kenyoro Elok Primary School, North Mugirango constituency, Nyamira County. KMG Primary School.
Asante sana Bwana Spika. Nikiwa mmoja wa kuunga mkono hii mambo ya mateso ambayo wakulima wetu wanapitia. Ni kweli mkulima wetu ako ndani anapitia mateso mengi, kwa sababu unapolima shamba yako unatarajia kupata mavuno. Vile sisi tunapokuja bunge tunatarajia ya kwamba tupate mshahara wetu. Wakulima wa Kenya wanaendelea kupata mateso, awe ni mkulima wa miwa, awe ni mkulima wa mahindi, kwa sababu hapati mafuno ambaye yeye hutarajia. Hili ni jambo ambalo tunafaa kuchukulia maanani, kwa sababu mkulima yeye akilima shamba lake anategemea mazao haya kwa kufanyia kazi, kwa mfano kulipia watoto wake school fees, kulima hiyo shamba tena, arudishe mazao ndani. Na si vyema serikali tukufu iwache wakulima kama hawa wateseke. Kwa mfano tulikuwa sehemu ya Eldoret mwanzo wa mwaka huu mwezi wa 3, na kusema ukweli tulipata wakulima wakiwa na malalamiko ya kutokulipwa, na huo ndio wakati walikuwa wanajitayarisha kwa kulima tena hayo mashamba yao. Ingawaje serikali ilitoa pesa kwa kiwango kikubwa na ikaongeza bei ya mahindi, unapata ya kwamba yule aliyenufaika kwa kupata mapato kutoka kwa malipo haya si mkulima wa kawaida. Unakuta ya kwamba ni watu wengine waliagiza mahindi kutoka nje ya nchi hii, ndio walipeleka mazao hayo kwa store hizi na wakaweza kunufaika badala ya mkulima wa kawaida. Hili si jambo nzuri, na ninaomba wabunge wenzangu ya kwamba wachukulie hili jambo kwa hali ambayo inatakikana. Mkulima asiendelee kupitia kwa mateso anayepitia. Kwa mfano, wakati huu tunapoongelea, sio mkulima wa mahindi anayeteseka peke yake. Hata mkulima wa miwa unakuta ya kwamba hata viwanda zetu zinaanguka kwa sababu ya hali hii. Na si vyema, Bwana Spika.
There is a rule of relevance. It's not nothing about the sugar. Eh?
No, lakini Bwana Spika, wote ni wakulima.
Now that you want to be relevant, you are discontinued. Member for Soy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this petition by the Honorable Alfred Keter, who is also a farmer. Mr. Speaker, the issue is the leader of majority is asking which farmer. Will take him on a tour of Wasigishu and Nandi County and he'll see. Mr. Speaker, the issue at hand is a very, very key issue. It's a key issue that touches on the very people that we sit in this house courtesy of their votes. Mr. Speaker, the reason why our farmers have not been paid is not because the Treasury doesn't have money or the Treasury has refused to release the money. The money has been released, but Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Mr. Speaker, wrote a letter to the Minister of Agriculture refusing, or rather directing him not to pay any farmer until they complete their investigations. Mr. Speaker, we have since learned also that the functions of the NCPB, which handles the strategic gain reserve, have been moved through an executive order to the Ministry of Devolution. So we would like also direction whether that letter now dies and the Honorable Eugene Warumalwa can release the funds. Mr. Speaker, the farmers, most of their children are in school and are suffering because every single day the principals are asking where for the school fees. And those farmers need to be paid urgently, Mr. Speaker. But one key issue, Mr. Speaker, sir, is a lot of farmers took loans from the Agricultural Finance Corporation to finance their production of maize for last season. Up to now, we have farmers who are getting demand letters from AFC, which is also another government entity. We have a government entity here which owes farmers money, and we have a government entity on this side which farmers owes money and is demanding money from the farmers. Mr. Speaker, going forward, we need a law that will safeguard the farmers from being charged interest by AFC when they have already delivered maize to the National Cereals and Produce Board. And we'd like also direction, Mr. Speaker, as to which committee will handle this now that the functions of the Strategic Gains Reserve, or NCPB, have been moved from the Ministry of Agriculture to the Ministry of Devolution. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, the petition is referred to the relevant Committee of Agriculture to handle and invite all those concerned to shed light on the plight of farmers. Next order.
Order number 5, papers.
Is the Honorable Makali Mulu present? Oh, obviously, today you are in a very unusual position. I was looking for you at your usual place. Proceed. If you are ready with the report, Honorable Makali Mulu, you can.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was consulting my friend here and my neighbor. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, I have not been given the report yet, so I think I'll be able to tape it tomorrow or next week.
The report has not been handed over to you. Did you say that you haven't received the report?
I'm saying you might have approved the report, but I don't have the report here, Mr. Speaker. So I'm not able to table because I don't have the hard copy. The clerk has not forwarded it to me.
The clerk has not sent the report, or?
I'm saying I don't have the report which I'm supposed to table now, but I will
very
table
well.
possibly tomorrow, Mr. Speaker.
You can
if you allow me tomorrow.
You can table it tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next.
Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, statements. Order number 8, motion, report of the Committee of the Whole House on the Land Value Index Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2018. Question to be put in third reading.
Honor members, order. Where are you? Where are you? What are you doing now? Debate on this bill was concluded yesterday. Honor members, what remained was for the question to be put, which I hereby do. That this House do agree with the report of the Committee of the Whole House on its consideration of the Land Value Index Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2017. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? As many as the contrary opinion say nay. The ayes have it. Mover.
Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that the Land Value Index Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2018, be now read a third time. I also request Honorable Nyamai, the Chair of Lands Committee, to second.
Honorable Nyamai.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I second.
No. Honor members, I propose the question, which is the Land Value Index Laws Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 3 of 2017, be now read.
To be given positions to serve even within our own mandate, Mr. Speaker. With those many and few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support and I hope we take consideration to the remarks that even the youth and the young people of this country can serve in their own departments and even beyond, because they have done so in the past, they can do so now, and they can do so in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Minority Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support this motion to approve Francis Otieno Wino as the nominee for the Principal Secretary of State Department for Youth. Mr. Speaker, I have a few comments to make. The first one is I want to congratulate this gentleman for making it this far. I know he has passed through a very long process of recruitment and finding favor with the President for appointment, and now he has been vetted by a committee, and now he's before us to be approved by this House. I just wanted to make a few comments. Number one, I don't think you really have to be a youth to be a PS in the State Department for Youth. What is needed is someone who has the required experience, the required knowledge, and required enthusiasm and will to serve the youth of this country. And I believe that Dr. Francis Otieno will be able to articulate and help the youth of this country progress. Mr. Speaker, my only concern with this department, the reason why this department was created, and actually a full ministry at one point was created for youth of this country, was on realization that the challenges that the youth face in this country was so important, so complex, that required...
With the needs, with the experiences of our young people of today. Because what we told him is, you know, today, Mr. Wino is 53 years old, but we told him today, even if you're 30, you might not be able to connect with the need of an 18-year-old because of just the differences in need, in style. But we believe he will take up the docket, and I congratulate him and hope he does a good job. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I'm saying the member for Kitutu Chache North, the deputy leader of the majority, desirous of saying something. But of course, I only hope that honourable members, before the Honourable Jimmy Angwenyi speaks, you have noticed that the majority whip has been moving all over. I'm sure he's passing some message to many of you, because I know you have several motions of this kind. Some of you come here and request that, I need to contribute to this one because this one is from my village, is from my constituency. What you are saying, that you want to contribute, you just want to be seen saying that you know the nominee, and then say some one or two things, hoping that now you have gone to make calls to him. You see, you have seen me saying this. But you have left, you never know, you may have left him not to be approved. So your contribution will have been zero, surely. Honorable Angwenyi.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, will give me a chance to contribute to this motion. Mr. Speaker, outright I want to advise my colleagues here that Banapa wase akiharibiki neno, where there are wise men like me, wise old men like me, things don't go howry. They are clean. Mr. Speaker, Dr. Francis Owino is qualified, and I'm glad the committee were able to identify him with his talents and recommend him for that position. Mr. Speaker, I've done a study of 6 countries in the world which have moved from third world to first world, starting with Singapore. There's one element I've found in all these 6 countries, the element of imparting appropriate skills to the youth. That's in each of those countries that I've studied. They have got that element that the government undertook upon itself to impart appropriate skills to the youth. And when the youth acquired the skills, the country was able to catapult itself to the first world. Mr. Speaker, the program that we had, which has been messed up by the latest developments, whereby those cohorts who are hired in each of the constituencies and wanted to be in every constituency in the country, those cohorts were supposed to work in the morning from 8 to 12. Then from 2 to 5, they are given appropriate skills, so that by the time their cohort time ends, they are qualified in certain skills. That's how it was supposed to be. But it was messed up. But also, even this house messed up. They were punishing those cohorts, those youths, by reducing their budget. We are punishing the wrong people, the youth who are benefiting from that budget. Because of the mistakes of some people, a few people, we are punishing now the entire youth group of Kenya. We are punishing them. So I'm going to urge this House, when we are doing our supplementary, we'll replenish those funds and even add some more to the youth. And I'm sure under the management of Dr. Owino, we have got miles, we'll move miles. And I think by the time we discuss our budget next year, we'll have gotten information that Owino has really changed and adapted appropriate management for this youth of this country. And I'm sure he will be able to achieve that, especially working with the CS, Dr. Professor Kobia, who is also a very smart person. Mr. Speaker, again, the appointment of Mr. Owino, from where I come from, we thank the government. You know, those southern regions, we normally don't get these things. So we thank the government for having proposed him to take that position.
Honorable Millie, now again she has changed the name. Honorable Odhiambo Akoth, you have an intervention.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I stand under Standing Order number 95. Mr. Speaker, everybody who's been speaking here is only heaping praises on the nominee. And going, and I'm sure almost everybody here would be saying the same thing, including myself. So going by the mood of the House, and given that we'll get opportunity to speak on similar motions ahead of us, like I'd want to support Esther Koimet and Priscilla Nyokabi and others. Mr. Speaker, would I therefore be in order to call on the mover to reply?
Well, I'll put the question, which is that the mover be called upon to reply. As many as that opinion say aye. Those of the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. Mover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I take this opportunity to thank honorable members for supporting this motion. Mr. Speaker, I have had concerns from some members on the population of the youth. The percentage of the youth population does not worry me much. But what worries me most, Mr. Speaker, is the question of unemployment. As a committee, we sat and gave 1.5 billion to Youth Enterprise Fund. The core reason behind this, the committee's decision, Mr. Speaker, was to decentralize this money as loan in each constituency so that youth will do business, youth will employ themselves. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the Committee of Budget decided to take that money away and give it to roads, as if youth agenda is not part of this government's agenda. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I thank each and every member who contributed to this motion. I thank your office and the Office of Clerk for enabling us. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move. I beg to reply, sorry.
Honourable members, I put the question that taking into consideration the recommendations of the Departmental Committee on Labour and Social Welfare in their report on the vetting of the nominee for approval as Principal Secretary for State Department of Youth, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155, Clause 3, Paragraph B of the Constitution, this House approves the appointment of Dr. Francis Otieno Owino as the Principal Secretary for State Department of Youth. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. Next.
Order number 11, special motion, approval of a nominee for appointment as the Principal Secretary for State Department of Transport.
Chair, Transport Committee, Honorable Hosing.
I thank you, Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that, taking into consideration the recommendations of the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works, and Housing, in their report on vetting of the nominee for approval as the Principal Secretary for State Department of Transport, laid on the table of the House, Speaker, on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to provisions of Article 155, Sub-Article 3B, Speaker, of the Constitution, this House approves the appointment of Ms. Esther Koimet as Principal Secretary for State Department of Transport. Speaker, as I move that motion, Speaker, allow me to say that on 24th July 2018, His Excellency the President forwarded to the National Assembly for consideration and approval the notification of Ms. Esther Koimet as Principal Secretary Transport. This was, Mr. Speaker, in accordance with provisions of Article 155, Sub-Article 3B of the Constitution, and Section 5 of Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011. Speaker, Honorable Speaker, in accordance with Standing Orders 42, 1, and 3C, the Speaker, having read the message from the President, referred the name of the nominee together with the CV or curriculum. Registrar of Political Parties, Higher Education Loans Board, Speaker, Credit Reference Bureau, Kenya Revenue Authority, and Ethics and Corruption, Speaker. And finally, that this nominee, Speaker, the committee never received any contestation from the members of the public contesting her suitability for appointment as a permanent secretary in this department, Honorable Speaker. Speaker, we also noted a very important point that Esther Koimet's Speaker is a household name in this country. But more important, maybe people may not know that Esther Koimet is a daughter of the veteran politician, the late Biwott, Honorable Speaker. The humbleness she showed to the committee, Speaker, really is beyond imagination. And we thought that, in fact, Speaker, with that career, we thought that this was a CS material, Speaker, not even a PS material. And in conclusion, therefore, we recommend that, Speaker, pursuant to Article 155 of the Constitution and the Standing Orders 216(5), we recommend that, Speaker, the committee recommends that the National Assembly approves the nomination of Ms. Esther Koimet for appointment by the head of state, by His Excellency the President, as Principal Secretary, State Department of Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing, Speaker. With those many remarks, I beg, therefore, to move, Honorable Speaker, and ask Honorable Peris Tobiko to second me, Speaker. I thank you.
Honorable Tobiko.
Thank you, Speaker. Honorable Speaker, it's my pleasure to second on the motion that the Chair Transport Committee has moved on the nomination of Esther Koimet. Honorable Speaker, in Esther Koimet, I had a chance as part of the vetting committee to meet a Kenyan woman, public servant of no mean repute, Mr. Speaker. She definitely has very impressive academic qualifications, credentials, and she also has an excellent career progression in the public service, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the committee really satisfied itself on the various certifications from the relevant government entities, including KRA, the ESCC, and the others that have cleared Esther Koimet as a person with a clear record, Mr. Speaker. At one time, there was an ESCC report that that passed through this House, and Esther Koimet, who was cleared by ESCC, that she was definitely not involved in any corruption issue, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Esther Koimet proved to the committee, Mr. Speaker, that she will definitely be able to take the Ministry of Transport, the Directorate of Transport to a higher level, Mr. Speaker. She's one of the very few Kenyan women who have been at the levels. Honorable Speaker, I will seek the indulgence of the Chief Whip that although he's very passionate about his job, he should allow us a fair chance to execute the case of Esther Koimet. And Honorable Speaker, I personally, and together with the other members of the committee, felt that Esther Koimet is one public servant who still can contribute a lot to this country. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Do you second?
I second, Honorable Speaker.
Member for Yata, since coming back to the House, I think you have assumed a method of just walking about. But anyway, maybe it has to do with the constituency. Honourable members, I propose a question which is that taking into account consideration the recommendations of the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works, and Housing in their reports on the vetting of the nominee for approval as the Principal Secretary for State Department of Transport, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155, Clause 3, Paragraph B of the Constitution, this House approves the appointment of Ms. Esther Koimet as the Principal Secretary for State Department of Transport. Leader of the Minority Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't know why the Deputy Leader of Majority is so keen in having us conclude the debate today. But, Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak to this motion. I have no doubts in my mind on the qualifications, the competence, ability of Esther Koimet. I have known her for quite some time now. She has worked at the Treasury successfully, and I think she's a very humble lady. That also is a plus for her. Despite her privileged background, she's a very humble lady, which is very rare in most circumstances. However, Mr. Speaker, the reason why I have decided to make my contribution to this on the appointment of this nominee is that there is something hanging on her that she needs to work on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I remember in 2011, there was an investigation on the disposal of land owned by Kenya Railways. And Mr. Speaker, Esther Koimet was indicted by this House. Public Investment Committee investigated a parcel of land in Lavington, which she acquired irregularly, Mr. Speaker. She acquired it irregularly despite the fact that that land was advertised, and the highest bidder, who was supposed to be allocated that land, had bid for about 11 million. Under unclear circumstances, Esther Koimet, who did not even bid, was given that land and paid only 6 million shillings. Mr. Speaker, it was clear to the committee of PIC that she used her influence in her office to get that land. And this House, Mr. Speaker, National Assembly, recommended that she should not hold a public office. And Mr. Speaker, even though it has taken about 7 years, but I think she needs to clear her name with Public Investments Committee. Because, Mr. Speaker, this House cannot make recommendations, adopt them, and then the following day the same name is brought to us for appointment, and what we hear are just praises and praises and praises. Mr. Speaker, if someone has not conducted herself at one point in a state office, it should be mentioned. Even if we are going to approve her appointment, she should know that her integrity, insofar as that matter is concerned, has not been fully addressed. So, Mr. Speaker, as someone who is a loyal member of this House, I am going to agree, because I see the committee decided to do background check. I don't know whether they were privy to that information. But now that they have recommended her appointment, I just want to say that this House, even as we approve the appointment of Esther Koimet, that issue is still outstanding. This Parliament recommended that Esther promote someone we have recommended not to hold a public office. In my view, if you ask me, that is something that this House should not do. This House must hold fidelity to reports that we pass here. I've had members complain here many times that whatever we pass here is never implemented. Then again, today, we are approving appointment of someone who has been indicted by a report of this House. So, Mr. Speaker, how will I go on record as supporting this appointment? My view is simple, that unless that matter is sorted out, that Esther Koimet has something to explain to the people of Kenya. And I cannot support her appointment as a PS, yet in her current office, we had even recommended that she should not hold office. In fact, it's only that the government sometimes is not keen in implementing the recommendations of this House. Otherwise, she would not be holding a public office. So, Mr. Speaker, I oppose this appointment. I oppose this motion on the basis that this House had recommended that this is an officer who cannot hold a public office. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy Leader of Majority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this recommendation. And Mr. Speaker, Koimet met all the thresholds of integrity, of experience, of qualification. I don't think, Mr. Speaker, that if she may have committed something 8 years ago, okay, she must have corrected it. And in any case, Mr. Speaker, in any case, we are not sure about those bids, because a lot of people do bid things here in this country when in fact they don't intend to take them, so that they make it impossible for the correct people to acquire property. Mr. Speaker, it was the Railways Corporation which was selling land, and they decided to sell to Koimet at 6 million. And those days, Mr. Speaker, 6 million was like 600 million today. So, Mr. Speaker, the House may have passed as a recommendation, but were you waiting? Why didn't you have, she has been working in the public service. Why didn't you ask for it to be implemented in the last 7 years? Mr. Speaker, let us, this House should rise up. Let us not look at individuals on the basis of community, on the basis of politics, political affiliation. Mr. Speaker, this lady, she has worked very well in Treasury. She has worked very well in Treasury and not raise a point of order when we are writing things. So, Mr. Speaker, we should support this appointment, and I'm sure she will deliver.
Honorable Mbadi, what is your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, is the Honorable Angwenyi, in order to impute improper motive on me, that I was, the matters that I've raised is based on ethnicity, when I have cited the report of this House. Public Investment Committee report had indicted Esther Koimet. It is not Mbadi who has indicted. I've just raised my concern that how do we approve? So is it in order, Mr. Speaker, to impute improper motive, given that I'm the only one who has spoken against the approval of this, of Esther Koimet, Mr.
Speaker? Is the Honorable Leader of Minority in order to impute?
Now, Honorable Angwenyi, he rose on a point of order. Now you want to respond by another point of order. How is that? Honorable John Mbadi raised the issue that the indictment that he raised was contained in a report of this House. So you cannot then claim that it is he who is raising that issue. So you can now defend the House.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not seeing any improper motive on his part. But Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's correct also for Honorable Mbadi to impute improper motive on the committee of 18 people. People who are experienced, people who have got the facts, 19 people who have got the facts, and they have unanimously approved this appointment. So, Mr. Speaker, but again, even in the region, you may commit an offense today, but if you go and apologize or beg a mass from God, God forgives you. She must have been forgiven if she did that mistake. That's how she continued working in the government. Mr. Speaker, let us approve Koimet for this position.
Sorry. Member for, no, this a new member has not known that here we don't raise hands. Just stay. You know, you don't seem to have a lot of hair on your head, but so you know the Swahili will tell you something about you know, lack of hair. The person on top is the member for Rangwe. Member for Muhoroni.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd actually intended to speak to the motion that was proposing the appointment of the PS Labour, but all the same, I think these are very able government servants that have been proposed. And I want to say that Madam Esther Koimet has had a checkered career in the Treasury. She has a long career. She's a bright Kenyan. And I'm happy that despite the record that Honorable Mbadi has tabled here, Esther is one of the, together with the newly proposed PS Labour, are serious career civil servants who have had a checkered career emanating from a long period and have what it takes to be there. They are bringing on board lots of their experience and their competence, and this will help us mitigate the vice that has come into being today, where most of these principal secretaries and major government appointments are considerations done to various corporate personalities, most of those who have been working outside, but they have been known to be quietly supporting political parties while they were working outside. Then this vice was eating into the fabric of the civil service, such that we have there's a lot of stagnation in the line of appointment for career civil servants. So I want to say that Esther Koimet has done a very good job in Treasury, and she's a very humble person, as has been described. Until today, very few of streetwise people like us knew she was the daughter of the dreaded late Kipiator Biwot. And you met her, she was just Esther Koimet, the officer that you went to see. And she has what it takes. So I want to recommend, I want to support the appointment and leave everything else to the procedure. If there's anything indictment that was done, I hope the government has several other mechanisms that can help us and ruffle that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of Majority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I join to support the report of the Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing on the vetting and adoption of Madam Esther Koimet for the position nominated to serve as the Principal Secretary in the State Department of Transport. Mr. Speaker, Madam Koimet has been working in the National Treasury as an investment secretary, Director General, Public Investment and Portfolio Management since the 2005. That is a serious portfolios and departments in the National Treasury. And I am sure why the President chose her, nominated her for transport, is because of the kind of investment and portfolio management skills and experience that Esther has. Of course, Mr. Speaker, Esther is the daughter of the late powerful man, Honorable Kibiator Arap Biwot, total man. Honorable Speaker, the nominee held that directorship position in her current and previous employment and a number of organizations relevant to the transport sector, including she participated in the investment turnaround of the Kenya Railways, Kenya Post Authority, Kenya Airways, and she was instrumental in the formation of what we have today as a privatization commission in government. Speaker, being a holder of a master's degree in business administration from the University of Nairobi, Esther also, within the reading of the act, in terms of as a person qualifies, Esther Koimet qualifies, she has experience, and she has the academic qualifications. Mr. Speaker, based on the letter attached to the report from EACC, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission has indicated to the National Assembly in writing that she has been cleared of any economic crimes or corruption related. The nominee, Mr. Speaker, has also been cleared by the CID, the Kenya Revenue Authority, and the other organizations like the Higher Education Loans Board. And Mr. Speaker, Esther has never been dismissed from office for contravening the provisions of Article 75 of the Constitution, which deals with the conduct of state officers and has never been adversely mentioned, of course, in investigatory report. Of course, Mr. Speaker, while I was away, the leader of minority raised, and I really want to agree with him, that the telecom report and the KPRL report of the, I think, 11th Parliament mentioned. But, Mr. Speaker, Parliament do not charge people. Parliament recommend to other agencies. And if the other agencies, including EACC, because Parliament said there are certain issues, but EACC said, yes, after due diligence, after investigating, we have found Esther Koimet to be cleared and to have no pending case. So even if they were mentioned in one way or the other by a parliamentary committee, that committee recommendation was sent to the relevant agencies of government, and they did due diligence on Esther Koimet, and they have given her a clean bill of health. Mr. Speaker, Madam Koimet will be among the first PS, female PS, to hold that coveted position of PS transport. And I'm sure those men and women who work with the National Treasury will confirm that Esther Koimet is a performer. And Mr. Speaker, of course, pursuant to Article 155(3) of the Constitution, and the National Assembly Standing Orders 216/51, the Committee of Transport have approved the nomination of Madam Esther Koimet. And Madam Speaker, I really want to urge our colleagues that in terms of vetting, we have been given the marking scheme. You know, notwithstanding your history, you have been given the marking scheme in the Constitution. In Article 75, we have been given the marking scheme that certain state organs, institutions must write confidential letters to Parliament, to the National Assembly, and that we must vet somebody based on the Parliamentary Parliamentary Act of 2011. And of course, is a person qualified in terms of experience and in terms of education qualification. And I think, holistically, Esther Koimet meets all the criteria, and I'm sure she will join the many women who are serving in the government of President Uhuru Kenyatta. And this is the only government that has given women more robust positions. Mr. Speaker, we are the only country in Africa where the defense minister, the foreign minister, and many, many other key portfolios are occupied by the women of Kenya. With those many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support and ask our colleagues that we approve the nomination of Esther Koimet to the coveted position, the prestigious position of PS Transport.
Member for Alego Usonga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to say that I oppose this motion because, Mr. Speaker, from the report that you have been read to us by the committee, we have been told that Esther has worked in government for many years, moving from one position to the other. But, Mr. Speaker, before we approve somebody for a very important position of, like a PS, we must interrogate the successes, the contributions that she was able to achieve in those positions. And, Mr. Speaker, when you go deeper into her contributions in those positions, Mr. Speaker, you will not see anything spectacular. And, Mr. Speaker, let me start by highlighting one of the most recent responsibilities that she had as Investment Secretary in the Treasury. And, Mr. Speaker, you know, Investment Secretary is the person who assists government in making investment decisions in various parastatals. And, Mr. Speaker, you know that we have had some of the decisions made in that respect, where some parastatals have collapsed. And, Mr. Speaker, we have not really come to interrogate what role did the Investment Secretary have in those decisions that resulted in these parastatals collapsing. Two, Mr. Speaker, during our tenure, we have seen government investing in some of the most expensive infrastructural projects. Some of these projects, Mr. Speaker, have resulted in us having our public debt hitting the roof. And, Mr. Speaker, these are some of the decisions that, Mr. Speaker, she must take responsibility for. And, Mr. Speaker, lastly also, I happen to have worked in the banking sector, Mr. Speaker. And for a person to sit in the Ministry of Transport as a PS. And, Mr. Speaker, you know that right now we are grappling with the questions of inefficiencies at the port, KPA, and various parastatals that are responsible for this docket, where she's supposed to go and sit and serve. Mr. Speaker, I want to implore this House that even going by her age, she's 61 years old. That means she's past retirement age. Mr. Speaker, we know that in this country, children of the rich really are not people who work hard. Even if they have to rise in positions, they rise because of favors. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to plead with the House that we must reject this appointment, because if we do approve this appointment, Mr. Speaker, we are going to cause confusion in this ministry. We need to have somebody, Mr. Speaker, who is going to demonstrate competency and who has a clear track record.
What is out of order? Honorable Baride.
Mr. Speaker, the honorable member has said a very weighty statement, that the children of the rich never write where they get because they deserve it or they work hard for it. And, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, is the honorable member, in order to insinuate that, why we'll know, seated where you are considered by Kenyans a rich man because you are an MP? Are you therefore saying your children don't have capacity to rise to the top? And is it that they get there by favors, Mr. Speaker? And can you even define rich? Can you even define rich, Mr. Speaker? We know, Mr. Speaker, we know of big people. We know of great leaders in this country, one of them being his party leader, didn't come from a poor family, but he has contributed immensely to this nation's growth. Are you saying he got there through favor, or did he work for it? And also our current president, Mr. Speaker. So I think he shouldn't insinuate such things. That he should, that's what I mean.
Honorable members, Honorable Baride, you are a senior member of this House. Surely, that's a point of argument. Now, this is a new member. He just came from Lego Songa. You know where Lego Songa is. Now, if you teach him this kind of way of interjecting, he is likely to think that that's the way the business of the House is transacted. I just cautioned him against every time raising his hand up. Now he may think that this is the way, what is that? Let him continue with his contribution.
Thank you, Mr.
He doesn't
Speaker.
have to withdraw. Proceed.
Speaker, thank you. I think that's Honorable Barire is putting a case, but I don't think it qualifies as a standing order. Mr. Speaker, as I summarize, as I conclude, I want to say that, Mr. Speaker, we know who Nicholas Kipiatorbi what was in this country during that time when Esther Koimet was rising in her positions. And Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter is that the positions she has held in government are not a question of her competence, a question of favors. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I insist that this is not the best person to sit in this position, and I would like to plead with the House to be decisive and to help the President to have the right person sitting in Transport Ministry as a PS, so that this country can grow and see and our agenda for realize. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Wanted to hear the member for Baringo North. Member for Baringo North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the motion. And Mr. Speaker, as I support this motion, I wish to say, Mr. Speaker, that the committee has taken time, Mr. Speaker, to vet the nominee. And Mr. Speaker, going through the report, I wish to refer, Mr. Speaker, to page 11 of the report. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at the nominee's abilities, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the nominee possesses excellent professional and educational qualities, Mr. Speaker, with impressive work background. Mr. Speaker, if a Kenyan, this nominee, has spent 35 years, Mr. Speaker, serving this country without any situation, Mr. Speaker, in those 35 years where her contact has been doubted, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is exactly why the President was able to nominate Esther Koimet to serve in this position of PS, if approved by this House, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you also look at the nominee's experience and qualities. Very impressive, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, what is very important, and I think members have not said this, issue on the public participation, Mr. Speaker. I want to refer members to page 12 of the report, Mr. Speaker, that, Mr. Speaker, by the close of business on 1st March in August, Wednesday, 1st August 2018, Mr. Speaker, the committee had not received any written memoranda on oath from the public, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is something that we need to take note, that even when Kenyans were given a chance to raise issues which they think oath filed against this nominee, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that I have known Esther Koimet, Mr. Speaker, for some time. She's a very, very committed Kenyan, very truthful, a very hard-working Kenyan, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, the report is so clear of the achievements she has been able to achieve when she served as Investment Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. And so, Mr. Speaker, I just want to call upon my colleagues, and I want to perhaps, Mr. Speaker, say that Honorable Mbadi had an issue about a report, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, which is in one of the reports of this House. That is okay, Mr. Speaker. But I want to say an issue raised in a report of this House, Mr. Speaker, with recommendations to various agencies to investigate, Mr. Speaker. And when those agencies, Mr. Speaker, was given a chance to comment on this nominee, Mr. Speaker, there was no objection again. And we have copies of those letters from EACC, Mr. Speaker, saying that there is no issue that they have on the nominee from the DCI. And so, Mr. Speaker, I just want to plead to my colleagues.
Honorable Mbadi, what is your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, again, is it in order for the Honorable Cheptumo to mislead the House and misrepresent what I said. Mr. Speaker, the report of the House is clear that the House recommended that she should not hold a public office. That is not the same as to be investigated. So there was no recommendation to other state agencies to investigate, which they investigated and cleared her. The House was satisfied with their findings that she is culpable and therefore should not hold public office. What then did happen is that the person who was supposed to get her out of office, for whatever reason, did not get her out of office. So, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Cheptumo is misleading and misreporting what I said. I said we recommended that she should, we actually approved as a House that she should not hold a public office. It was not a recommendation for further investigation.
Well, I think just to set the record straight on this matter of House recommendations, you know, to recommend that a person should not hold public office is one thing. But remember, the House has not appointed the person. So the appointing authority has to go and look at the report of the House, say, yes, this is your recommendation. What is the basis? So inevitably, the appointing authority has to do some inquiries and or investigations to either agree with the House recommendations or not. And it is for that reason, for those of you perhaps who only served in the 10th Parliament, where perhaps you may not have come across something called implementation status of House recommendations. Implementation status of House recommendations. Whoever it is to whom the recommendations are directed is obligated to report through that mechanism of implementation status whether this recommendation can be carried or not carried. You know, it's not enough to, it's not enough. The recommendation is not, you see, the House will make a recommendation, yes, and that is the farthest it can go. Recommendation that this one should start going to some church instead of a mosque, recommendation the other. If the House recommends that the Honorable Duale now should be attending the All Saints Cathedral, and it does not go to the All Saints Cathedral as recommended by the House, are you going to hold the Honorable Duale culpable of not obeying the recommendation of the House? Surely not. So the recommendation, and that's why it is important for House committees to be precise in their recommendations. Because you may make a recommendation that will just hang, that nobody, who is going to implement? You know, a recommendation that now we annex the Seychelles to be part of a province of Kenya. And then we shall be saying that this is what we recommended. We don't expect there to be a president in Seychelles. Will that be implemented? And by who? Is it by the UN? Is it by AU? Or, you know, surely. So it is true. The House may have recommended, and I'm not disputing what the Honorable John Bandi is saying, but if you recommend that a state officer or a public officer used interchangeably as they are in Article 260 should not hold public office, that recommendation must be acted upon by some other agency, because it is, you have just made, you have played your part. That other agency, which is to make the determination, is at the liberty to carry out, yes, this is what Parliament has said. You've had even some of your recommendations being cited even in proceedings in court. And you've even had some, it's being argued that these were just recommendations of politicians. And, you know, some people have dismissed the recommendations that way. But you still have done your part as a House in making the recommendation. But others who are supposed to act on them are at liberty to interpret them in whichever way. And if they decide that it is not necessary to go by the recommendation of the House, so be it. They will give you in their implementation status that we did not agree with this recommendation. We carried out investigations into this and the other, and these are our findings, and on the basis of our findings, we do not, this recommendation is not capable of implementation in the manner recommended. And the matter just rests there, because you will have done your bit, and the other agencies will also have done theirs. So it is for that reason that even our current committees, please don't just stop at some vague recommendation. If you don't want a state officer or public officer to hold public office, then you must recommend investigation to be carried out by some specific entity. Because you must give reasons. Will you be suggesting that the public officer or state officer has been working? Anyway, I don't want to say that. If you say that you found some public officer or state officer working in nude, they say now that should not hold a public office. And whoever is to implement that one, I don't know who would do that. Says, no, we found the person very well dressed. So please, even as we make our recommendations, I think we need to be careful what it is we want done and by who. It should not be left hanging. You must direct a particular office or agency to go and do further investigations that you yourself are not capable of doing. And I think both of you are right. The Honorable John Bandi is right that there was a recommendation. Yes, he's right. That is what was recommended. But again, what has been said both by the Honorable Leader Majority and Honorable Cheptumo is still correct, factually. Because if you can imagine, if we just here say that we have recommended this, recommended the other, I mean, then people will not hold offices. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to appreciate your clarification on that issue. So, Mr. Speaker, even on the matters of integrity and so on, this nominee, Mr. Speaker, from the report, she has never been dismissed or removed from office. She has never been charged in a court of law. And so, Mr. Speaker, looking at all the requirements, Mr. Speaker, the nominee really, in the opinion and the recommendation of the committee, Mr. Speaker, can be able to hold the office that has been nominated to serve in. And Mr. Speaker, I want to join those who support this report to request members to support this report so that we have the nominee, Mr. Speaker, appointed to the office of the Principal Secretary, Transport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, and I think also even as I weigh into this matter, let's also appreciate, we have recommended, this House has recommended several people not to hold public office or state offices. I can give you many examples of members of parliament in this House and the other House who have been recommended by committees and reports have been adopted by this House not to hold public office. I don't know what you will do, because some of them may be sitting with you. It is true. I mean, if I was fortunately, I have some memory about some of those names. Yeah, because there are many who have been recommended and they are here, serving as members of parliament. Some, and even in the other House. The other house has actually quite a number. And some of them were in this house in the last parliament. Yeah. In that 10th parliament, the members who served in the Public Investments Committee, if you go to the previous reports, you will find several of them who had been recommended not to ever hold a public office. Some even ended up being appointed cabinet ministers. They are with you in the 10th parliament. Go to those reports. So what happened? So, you know, the House did its part. Then you leave the public to deal with the rest. Of course, even the public ignored your recommendations and elected them. So you can see, because you exercise only delegated authority. The Honorable John Bandy, this matter is, I think, very weighty. Honorable members, because I can see we have quite some more business. Let me put the question, which is that the mover be called upon to reply. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as the counter opinion say no. The ayes have it. Mover.
Speaker, I thank you, and I beg to reply. And in doing so, Speaker, I want to thank honorable members who made contributions, very substantive contributions, including also Honorable Mbadi. Yeah. But I would wish that Honorable Mbadi could revisit his part of the contribution, which is that he doesn't want to support my report. You know, I respect this man called Mbadi. He would just revisit that part. In terms of fact, we can be able to proceed. But Honorable Speaker, in terms of performance, we have also forgotten Safaricom was part of it. You know, successful. KCB is one of it. Very successful person, Mr. Speaker. So, with those very few remarks, Speaker, I beg to reply.
Honourable members, having confirmed that the House still has quorum, I put the question that taking into consideration the recommendations of the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing in their report on the vetting of the nominee for approval as the Principal Secretary for State Department of Transport, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 155, Clause 3, Paragraph B of the Constitution, this House approves the appointment of Ms. Esther Koimet as the Principal Secretary for State Department of Transport. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next.
Order number 12, special motion. Approval of nominees for appointment as chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission.
Honorable Wario.
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That taking into consideration the recommendation of the Departmental Committee on Labor and Social Welfare in the report on the vetting of the nominees for approval as chairperson and members of National Gender and Equality Commission, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to the provision of Article 250, Subarticle 2B of the Constitution and Section 11(7), National Gender and Equality Commission Act 2011, this House approves the appointment of the following persons as the chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission. Mr. Speaker, because of the interest of time, I will be very brief on this. We sat as a committee and interviewed Dr. Muikali Mutinda as the chairperson of Gender and Equality Commission, Honorable Priscilla Nyokabi Kanywa as member, and Dr. Murithi J. Chomba as member. Mr. Speaker, the clerk of the National Assembly sent advertisement through media to ask Kenyans to give us memorandum on the suitability or otherwise of the said nominees. Mr. Speaker, we received one memorandum in support of Mheshimiwa Honorable Priscilla Nyokabi. Mheshimiwa Honorable Speaker, we again wrote to Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the Department of Criminal Investigation, Registrar of Political Parties, and HELP to give us, if they have any concerns on the nominees, and they have given them clean bill of health, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in terms of education and experience and exposure, the committee is fully satisfied with this, the chair, Madam Mwikali, Honorable Priscilla Nyokabi, and Dr. Murithi. Dr. Murithi, Mr. Speaker, is a person living with a disability, but he has 2 PhDs, Mr. Speaker. So the committee is, in terms of their suitability, the committee is contented. Mr. Speaker, the only concerns I have, or my committee had, is going to retire in November this year. The other one will retire next year. Because this is not just a commission like any other. This is a commission on gender and equality. The 2 members who are already in office are women. My appeal to appointing authority, if today this House approves the chair and the 2 commissioners, we have the chair, 1 commissioner, a male member, and another commissioner, a female member. Then when the other commissioner retires in November, I want the appointing authority to propose a male commissioner for appointment, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, my committee proposes the appointment of the chair and the 3 commissioners because they have satisfied all the issues we put before them. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I ask my able Vice Chair to second this motion.
Member for Bomet.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. I rise to support the report that has been moved by the Chair on the issue of the approval of the nominees for appointment as a chairperson and a member of the National Gender and Equal Commission. That is one, Dr. Joyce Mwikali Mutinda, to be the chairperson, having served or having an experience of about 40 years, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Priscilla Nyokabi Kanywa, who happens to be once a member of this House, and not only that, a Vice Chair of Justice and Legal Affairs, and Honorable Speaker, Dr. Muriti Jomba Munyi, who comes from persons living with disability. In the sense that, Honorable Speaker, the committee did the vetting, and I want to congratulate the committee, the chair, and even the table clerks for the reports that they have come up with. And Honorable Speaker, and to state, Honorable Speaker, that all the 3 nominees possesses the requisite qualification, experience, and exposure for the respective position which they have been nominated. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to support or to second.
Members, I propose a question, which is that taking into consideration the recommendations of the Departmental Committee on Labor and Social Welfare in their report on the vetting of the nominees for approval as a chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 250, Clause 2, Paragraph B of the Constitution, and Section 11, Subsection 7 of the National Gender and Equality Commission Act 2011, this House approves the appointment of the following persons as the chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission. 1, Dr. Joyce Mwikali Mutinda, chairperson. 2, Honorable Priscilla Nyokabi Kanywa, member, and 3, Dr. Murithi J. Chomba Munyi, member, person living with disability. The member for Honorable Otiende Amolo, Honorable Otiende Amolo. Let's just here. There's an interesting point here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, mine is actually an intervention, and it's a very fundamental intervention that goes beyond just the names proposed here. Mr. Speaker, I rise under Standing Order 47.3 in terms of the constitutionality of the proposed motion as read with Section 7 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act. Mr. Speaker, under Article 94, Sub-Article 4, the fundamental role of this House as a House of Parliament is to protect the Constitution and promote democratic governance. Mr. Speaker, it therefore takes us to Section 9 of the National Gender and Equality Commission Act that talks to appointments of commissioners, which is well cited by the committee, and it states that there shall be a chair and 4 commissioners appointed in accordance with the Constitution and the Act. Mr. Speaker, sir, Article 27, Sub-Article 8, requires this House, in accordance with its mandate, to ensure that there is no more than 1/3 or 2/3 of either gender in appointive positions. The position must be taken, and let us take judicial notice, Mr. Chairman, that there are already 2 very able serving commissioners, both of whom are ladies. There's Dr. Gumato Ukur, a very able commissioner. There's Commissioner Florence Nyokabi Wachira, a very able commissioner. What that means, in my understanding, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that in this instant appointment, we then have to appoint only 1 lady and 2 men. Unfortunately, while the mover, the chair, and I sympathize with the chair, he notices that point and he says we should remedy in future. What he's saying, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that let us breach the Constitution now for the appointing authority to remedy in November. That cannot be. If this House, which should uphold democratic values, breaches that, then even those who stand for firm gender equality will suffer that similar cost when in other institutions they will put more men than ladies. In my understanding, Mr. Speaker, if you have to have 5 commissioners, 1/3 is 1.6666. In other words, it's 1.7%. That, therefore, must equate to 2 rather than 1. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is my belief that in upholding gender equality, we must not do gender suppression, because then the effect will come to haunt us, even on the very weighty matters, as we are going to consider in future, of how to engender this House in terms of the constitutional requirements. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, with tremendous respect to the committee, I do submit that they may have not foreseen or they may not have sufficiently considered this matter, and they are therefore inviting the House to breach the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, sir, I invite you to give guidance on this, because we are in danger of breaching the Constitution. Thank you.
Leader of Majority, you want to address the point?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of respect for the former Ombudsman and current Member of Parliament for Arieta. Mr. Speaker, what is before this House is the 3 names sent by the appointing authority. And what Honorable Otiende is trying to tell you to address to is the full composition of the commission, of the National Gender Commission. Mr. Speaker, this is a commission that, as currently constituted, there is a staggering process. In fact, there are 2 commissioners of 1 gender who their term is coming to an end. Mr. Speaker, you remember even at the beginning of this parliament, the president sent you seven cabinet secretaries. And that question, the same question came into fore. How do we address the gender parity in the total composition of the cabinet? And I'm sure my colleagues who are in the appointment committee, you remember we addressed it and we agreed over a long period. We can, as a House, Mr. Speaker, only address in as far as the message that you have received and you have read and you have sent to a committee. Those three names, do they constitute the constitutional threshold of gender parity? Of either gender. We have three names, 2 women, 1 man. That is the compliance standard. We cannot, and this House, Mr. Speaker, cannot legislate in vain or in anticipation. This House can only legislate on a matter before it, either from the executive or from the Senate or from its individual members or from the executive through the leader of majority. So, Mr. Speaker, you can only address yourself into the message that came to you, which you read it and you sent it to.
I think we need to address. The only unfortunate thing is that we are raising this issue of gender only where now the gender that has always been disadvantaged is the one that has advantage today. Mr. Speaker, if it was the other way around, I would have said that as a House, we need to open a new chapter by rejecting these appointments on the basis of gender. Because, Mr. Speaker, I will not agree with what the leader majority said, that we are just approving 3 names. We are approving 3 names to join a commission. And already there are members in that commission. And the joining of these 3 members is going to destabilize the gender equity and the threshold as provided for in the Constitution. Therefore, we cannot say that we have to be blind to the fact that already the gender balance is tilted. But, Mr. Speaker, the reason why Parliament is vetting nominees from executive is not just to look at their qualifications, academic capacity, but also to look at other factors which include gender, marginalized groups, and even in terms of inclusivity. So we need to look at all these matters in totality. So, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Tiende is perfectly in order to raise this matter. Only that I'm reluctant to support that route because in this House, we have passed appointments with skewed gender in favor of men. So if today it is in favor of women, I'm going to be blind again and approve because we have done it for men. Otherwise, we are going to be seen as a House that only looks at the welfare and interests of men. Mr. Speaker, that is the only reason why I would disagree with Honorable Tiende, but not that he doesn't have a point. He has a point, but I would want to ask Honorable Tiende to keep his point until that time when the appointments by the President or whoever is going to bring appointments to this House will be in favor of men to the disadvantage or in contravention of the Constitution, then we will start now making sure that we follow the Constitution. But if we start it today, Mr. Speaker, I am afraid we are going to be seen as a House that does not care about women of this country. Mr. Speaker, that is my only fear. Otherwise, I would have supported this. But, Mr. Speaker, this brings to question the fundamental issue of the advice that the appointing authorities get or receive from either legal advisors, the Attorney General, before the appointing authority forwards the names to this House. And the main reason why is the appointing authority is because he's supposed to look at all these constitutional requirements. He should have known that already in that commission there are 2 women. Therefore, he can only bring another 1 woman. And where there are more men, he should only bring the additional. I heard Honorable Duale say that now there are people who are about to retire. Why couldn't he keep one of these women, these eminent women, and one of them is Priscilla Nyokabi, our colleague who has been here. I would be very reluctant to really oppose her appointment for any position. Why couldn't we keep one of the ladies for appointment when the other retire? So, Mr. Speaker, I think the appointing authority, who is the president, needs to take note, and the advisors need to take note that, including who? No. I am sure on this one, Baba's opinion was not sought. Otherwise, if it was sought, it would have been done differently, Mr. Speaker. And I would have known that the opinion was sought. Probably I would have helped to advise differently. But, Mr. Speaker, back to the serious matter before us, I just want to ask that we allow this debate to proceed on the basis that now, today, maybe for the first time in the history of this country, we are seeing more women now given more position in a commission. The only unfortunate thing, it is now gender. I wish it was another commission. You know, when it is gender, people may think because it is gender, that is why we are giving more women appointments. But that not to demean this commission. This is a very important commission, Mr. Speaker, and I support that we, I thought I was debating. Mr. Speaker, I would urge that you rule that we proceed with the debate, and Honorable Tiende, I'm sure now is persuaded enough to relax and let this matter proceed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank both the leaders of majority and minority for the insight, and also the Honorable Tiende for raising this matter. It is a matter that we agonized on in the committee, and that is the reason that, the chairman actually raised it. Actually, the chairman raised it as a solution, because you realize that the commission that we are replacing had, equally had one gentleman and 4 women commissioners. So, and that issue was not raised previously. So we were taking on the progressive approach, that now that we are seized of this matter, we want to progressively resolve it. And that is why we have said that very soon as the 2 commissioners leave, which is just later this year, we now remedy the situation. So, Mr. Speaker, it is a matter that is the committee that oversights the commission is seized of, and we will remedy it, and we are advising, of course, because the matter has come up, the appointing authority, that this matter is remedied as we move forward. So we are seized of it, and it is being addressed. Not to say that the issues raised by Honorable Tiende are invalid, they are indeed valid, but as the leader of minority has said, really, today is a really, really bad day to raise it, because we are really, really invested in the commission that we are speaking about here. The Honorable Priscilla Nyokabi, Mr. Speaker, was one of the most brilliant members of the 11th Parliament. It would be unfortunate that this hitch comes on a day that we want to really approve a really, really brilliant member who is going to make a difference within the Gender and Equality Commission. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May you rule that we proceed.
Well, obviously, the issue raised by the Honorable Tiende Amolo is one. First of all, on the basis of Article 27, it's in the, as you know very well, it's in the Bill of Rights. 27, 6 and 8. But again, it's one of those very baffling situations. Like the Honorable John Bandi has said, it's a very unfortunate situation, because an issue has even been raised, why it is that we have not even addressed the issue of the 2/3 gender, particularly when, and I'm sure we are lucky in this house in that we have the Honorable Otiende Amolo, when it is clearly provided that in Article 81 that the electoral system, so that all these issues we've been grappling with here is the electoral system. If we had cured the problem in the electoral system, I'm sure it would have been a lot easier to deal with the appointive situations. So I think the Honorable, what I hear from the Honorable John Bandi, the Honorable Gladys Nyasuna Wanga, the Honorable Duale, the Honorable Ali Wario, the chair of this committee saying is, yes, we acknowledge those provisions, but say that maybe we leave the issue of that interpretation to those mandated to do so under Article 165, so that we proceed. We hope that the interpretation comes after November, in which case then it might be a moot point if it comes after November. But of course, the other issue is under the relevant law on Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act, even if we don't approve, then the law says that they will then stand approved, duly appointed, indeed. So it's one of those things that maybe we should ask the Honorable Otiende Amolo to go and get an interpretation of this from the Supreme Court, so that we can. The Honorable Gladys Wanga talked about, you see, there has been this debate about progressive implementation. The Honorable Otiende Amolo, you want to concede something?
Mr. Speaker, as you know, it is my want to point out constitutional matters, and I respect the minority leader and Honorable Gladys Wanga, who concede the unconstitutionality, but plead that on the basis of expedience, we pass the name. I associate with that, but not with the majority leader, who seeks to misinterpret the law on that point. Mr. Speaker, I'm willing to concede that, particularly on the basis that this House has been known to commit many more fundamental errors on that score. I concede that we concede with the debate and approve the names.
Then I put the question, which is that the mover be called upon to reply. Will as many as that opinion say aye? And those of a contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it. Mover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I take this opportunity to thank honorable members who supported this motion. We have heard Mheshimiwa Otiende loud and clear. As a committee, I earlier raised the same concern, Mr. Speaker. I give undertaking to this House that as a committee comes November, if we are not given the name of a male commissioner, then we will send back to the sender. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move. Thank you very much. To reply, I beg to reply. Thank you.
Honour members, I put the question, which is that taking into consideration the recommendations of the Departmental Committee on Labour and Social Welfare in their report on the vetting of the nominees for approval as a chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 250, Clause 2, Paragraph B of the Constitution, and Section 11, Subsection 7 of the National Gender and Equality Commission Act 2011, this House approves the appointment of the following persons as a chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission. 1, Dr. Joyce Mwikali Mutinda, chairperson. 2, the Honorable Priscilla Nyokabi Kanywa, member. And 3, Dr. Murithi J. Chomba Munyi, member, person with disability. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as the contrary opinion say no. The ayes have it.
Order number 13, special motion, approval of nominees for appointment as high commissioners and ambassadors.
Honorable Kato Lemetito.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that, taking into consideration the recommendation of the Departmental Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations in their report on the vetting of the nominees for approval as High Commissioners and Ambassadors, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7th, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 132, Subclause 2E of the Constitution, this House approves the appointment of the following persons as High Commissioners and Ambassadors. 1, Mr. Francis Ndegwa Muhoro, High Commissioner to Malaysia. 2, Mr. Manoa Esipisu, High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. 3, Honorable Benjamin Lagat, High Commissioner to Namibia. 4, Ms. Sarah Serem, Ambassador to China. 5, Lieutenant General Samuel Vita, Ambassador to Israel. 6, Honorable Patrick Cornell Odero Ahenda, Ambassador to Qatar. 7, Ambassador Peter Nicholas Oginga Ogego, Ambassador to Saudi Arabia. 8, Lieutenant General Johnson Kimani Ondieki, Ambassador to Turkey. And 9, Mr. Chris Karumba Mburu, Ambassador to South Sudan. Mr. Speaker, the Office of Ambassadors and High Commissioners is an office under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and their duties, among others, as follows. 1, the advancement and protection of Kenya's interests in host countries and countries of accreditation through innovative diplomacy. 2, promotion of Kenya's influence in international decision-making. 3, protection of Kenya's sovereignty and territorial integrity. 4, promotion and strengthening of bilateral and multilateral cooperation ties. 5, promotion of sub-regional, regional, and international integration and cooperation. And 6, is promotion of public diplomacy, among other duties. Mr. Speaker, yes, I will summarize. I agree, but you'll bear with me. These are 9 nominees. Mr. Speaker, the parliamentary committee followed the procedures as laid down in the Constitution and other acts of parliament and the standing orders in vetting these Kenyans. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, without going into the details of individuals, that all the nominees were cleared by the relevant authorities as required by law, that is by the Higher Education Loan Board, by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, by the Kenya Revenue Authority, Directorate of Criminal Investigation, and the Registrar of Political Parties. They are all compliant. Mr. Speaker, these are Kenyans, and actually in terms of trying to balance the region, the 9 candidates are all from different counties, 9 counties as well. And in terms of work experience, Mr. Speaker, they all have, Sarah Serem has got 30 years of work experience, Vita 40, Muhoro 25 years of work experience, Manoa 20 years of work experience, Ahenda 34 years of work experience, Oginga Ogego 18 years of work experience, Ondieki 34 years of work experience, Karumba 40 years of work experience, and Lagat 15 years of work experience. Of course, he was the youngest, just 42 years old, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that there are people who have served in public office for long, serving this country, and therefore they all meet the requirements as stipulated in law. But I just want to highlight one thing, that, Mr. Speaker, during the window of public participation, that is as required by the Constitution and also by the Parliamentary Approval Act, Parliament advertise and give public for a chance to make participation. And we only received, Mr. Speaker, 2 memoranda that were contesting the suitability of one nominee, that is Mr. Ndegwa Muhoro. and actually there were no other memoranda against other nominees. But Mr. Speaker, one of the memoranda that was sent was actually dismissed because it arrived beyond time. It was time barred. Actually, it came when the nominee was already vetted by the committee. But there was one by Ahmed Abdullah Nasir, and Mr. Speaker, we resolved as a committee that the memoranda actually lack merit, and therefore it was not adopted as well. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the committee, I would like to present that in accordance with Article 78, 1 and 2, all nominees are Kenyan citizens. None of them hold dual citizenship. Mr. Speaker, again, they all have impressive academic credential and professional training and experience.
It will be therefore unfair if we victimize individuals for actions done in course of delivering their mandate. This House today has a chance of setting a precedent on how we treat those who have not shied away from delivering their constitutional mandates without fear. With that very brief remark, allow me to say that I second the motion, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, I have not even proposed the question. The question must be proposed before it can even be put. So, honourable members, I propose the question that taking into consideration the recommendations of the Departmental Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations in their report on the vetting of the nominees for approval as High Commissioners and Ambassadors, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 132, Clause 2, Paragraph E of the Constitution, this House approves the appointments of the following persons as High Commissioners and Ambassadors. 1, Mr. Francis Degwa Muhoro, High Commissioner to Malaysia. 2, Mr. Manoa Esipisu, High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. 3, the Honorable Benjamin Lagat, High Commissioner to Namibia. 4, Ms. Sarah Serem, Ambassador to China. 5, Lieutenant General Thuita, Ambassador to Israel. 6, the Honorable Patrick Cornel Odero Ahenda, Ambassador to Qatar. Honorable members, I think you are clapping too much. Just for the information of members, we always say that people declare their interests. At this point, I want to inform the House that when the Honorable Pandey Ahenda was first elected in a by-election as a member of Parliament in the 9th Parliament, I was one of his godfathers in escorting him to the Speaker to be sworn in. So, honourable members, I've declared my interest. 8, Ambassador Peter Nicholas Oginga Ogego, Ambassador to Saudi Arabia. 8, Lieutenant General Johnson Kimani Ondieki, Ambassador to Turkey. And 9, Mr. Chris Karumba Mburu, Ambassador to South Sudan. Leader of Majority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this report. And Mr. Speaker, I am sure many people are waiting for my position. My individual position, Mr. Speaker, as I have said before, as I said when we were dealing with the matter of Esther Koimet, the vetting procedures of the House is anchored in law, and the checklist is provided. And Mr. Speaker, regardless of issues that you have against a nominee, if the committee, a competent committee of this House, vetted a nominee based on the Statutory Instruments Act, based on the Public Parliamentary Approval Act, and the Constitution more so, section 75 of the Constitution and section 6, subsection 8 of the Public Parliamentary Act, looking into the qualification of the nominees, looking at their experience. And Mr. Speaker, Ambassador Oginga Ogego was a Kenyan Kenyan ambassador to the US, and I had the privilege of, in the 10th Parliament, seeing him in Washington. Mr. Speaker, is one of the finest diplomats that our country can be proud of. And I am sure he is going to make sure that while in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Fund for Development and other agencies will have the opportunity to provide more resources to our country. Speaker, of course, there is the issue of Saudi Arabia, but I want to confirm to the House that there are over 5 million Muslims who go to Saudi Arabia every year, either at Hajj or their religious activity. And they go to two cities. They go to the city of Mecca and Medina, where a non-Muslim is not allowed to go to those cities. But I can confirm that the President and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will make the deputy to Ambassador Oginga Ogego, if he's approved, to be from the Muslim faith, so that he can assist the ambassador deal with the other multilateral issues, and on the religious aspect, the deputy ambassador can deal with the 5 million Muslims who go to Saudi Arabia. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Pedi Ahenda, I had not met him, but I'm sure those members who served with him in the 9th Parliament, the Deputy Speaker, the current substantive Speaker, Honorable Chair of Defense, we have been told of good things. Honorable Cecily Mbarire, we have been told of Pedi Ahenda as a good man, and he has met all the threshold. On Honorable Benjamin Lagat, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Benja, I think, has the best job. He was the Chair of Finance. And he's a man who loves, you know, social life in the evenings. And you know, when you're an ambassador, of course, if I was asked to post him somewhere, I could have posted him to Russia, you know? But now Honorable Benja has enough time to play golf. He has enough time to do, to sell our country, but I'm sure, I am proud the President and this government is recognizing the talents of former MPs. You know, former MPs. We have passed Honorable Chepkonga here, we have passed Kajuju, we have passed Honorable Nyokabi this afternoon. You know, many. And there are 3 ambassadors, 3 members of Parliament. Honorable, I'm sure, Honorable, our former Air Force Commander, Lieutenant General Samuel Thuita, I am sure he's in the right.
Though they are in uniform, you'll appreciate the nature that this country has. No wonder why when we go for peacekeeping in the world, we have men and women, and we have this country flying high in our peacekeeping in the world. And that is why I thank the President for this good gesture of appreciating the good work for men and women in uniform, in giving them positions where they can showcase their talent of the many years they have learned in their duties. For those few...
Mr. Speaker, 4 comments I would want to make. First, Mr. Speaker, all the nominees, the 9 nominees are from different backgrounds, professions and careers. We have, for the second time, Mr. Ndegwa Muhoro being appointed as a diplomat, the second police officer to be appointed as a diplomat, Ndegwa Muhoro. We have 2 senior professional soldiers, Lieutenant General Ondiek and Lieutenant General Thuita, who have had a very successful career in the military, and diplomats by their own right. We have 2 politicians. I did serve the House with Honorable Peti Ahenda, although he was here for 1 year. And also in the 10th Parliament, I did serve with the Benjamin Langat. And the two politicians, interestingly, when you asked them, what experience do they have as diplomats? They said, Mr. Speaker, you cannot be an MP unless you're a diplomat, which we actually agree with them. Mr. Speaker, also, we have a retired career diplomat who has been reappointed again, and that is Ambassador Peter Oginga Ogego, somebody I did interact with when once he was in our ambassador in Canada, truly a very qualified ambassador who has been sent to Saudi. We have also a senior civil servant and two people from the private sector, that is Sarah Serem and Manoa, the man from State House, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the committee did observe, although they are all qualified, in the next appointment to be encouraging also to see the people in the diplomatic service within the ministry also appointed to the positions of ambassadors. Mr. Speaker, also in terms of age, when you look on the 9 appointees, 53 of, I'm sorry, all of them with the exception of one are over 53 years, with the oldest being Patti Ahenda at 66 and the youngest being Benjamin Langat at 42. Our observation, Mr. Speaker, is also good in future. This House will be very happy to see a younger generation also appointed into diplomatic service. Mr. Speaker, of interest also, and this is where the House needs to look into, we appear not to have set any laws in terms of academic qualification. So I think it is up to this House in future to look at what laws we need to bring so that we have academic qualifications. And to finalize, Mr. Speaker, is on the issue of Sarah Serem, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the 16th century, there was a king called Hammurabi. He ended up being called Hammurabi the lawgiver. Mr. Speaker, this was in Babylonian Empire, the current Iraq. This man believed in an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But, Mr. Speaker, this House is not guided by Hammurabi Code of Laws, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm more than glad, and to encourage members, Mr. Speaker, yes, Sarah Serem did cross members of parliament rightly. Members of parliament have a right to show their concern. But, Mr. Speaker, the mood in the country is that of handshake. Mr. Speaker, let us pass Sarah Serem as our handshake. But, Mr. Speaker, let her learn that when you are given power, Mr. Speaker, don't abuse, don't demean anybody, Mr. Speaker. The problem with Sarah Serem when she stood in that office is she wanted to demean members of parliament, which was very wrong, Mr. Speaker. Let her learn, and also let it be a lesson for those who are coming, Mr. Speaker. I do remember we served in the 9th Parliament, and we had one Ringera who had a habit of abusing members of parliament. And this House dealt with him until he left the office, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, after she goes to China, Mr. Speaker, as the ambassador, I want to assure members that we sit in the committee, because you are the oversight committee, if now should be reporting, we are the one oversighting now, Mr. Speaker. For once, as my colleague Dwale said, God is great. She'll be reporting to our committee, Mr. Speaker, through the ministry. So if there's in case of indiscipline, we'll deal with that. With those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support.
Honorable Kimunya.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the report of this committee and to congratulate the nominees, first of all, for being nominated and for getting this far in terms of the vetting. And I want to make a few remarks, perhaps not related to any specific individual, but because I know some of the things that happen within the diplomatic world, using my rather long time within government and interacting with the diplomats, not just from Kenya, but from other countries. And one of the issues I just want to, and perhaps the committee may want to look at that, is this is the second time we are, getting the second batch of ambassadors and high commissioners. And even the debate around Sarah Serem is almost being taken that, you know, it's good riddance rather than appointment on merit. Now, when that happens, and not just her, even some of the others in terms of the ones who were in cabinet, I think even the media was very clear that they have been dropped and now shipped away to become ambassadors. When that happens, the first thing that happens is that our ambassadors lose credibility within the diplomatic circles. The fellow ambassadors look at them as rejects in their own country. They look at them as people who have been taken there as good riddance. And we lose on the representation and the value we are sending these people for. So I really want to urge this House, even as we are looking at this, let's not pass the messages to the rest of the world that we are taking people out of Kenya because we don't want them here. Because then, when they represent us in those countries, they will never be respected by the other diplomats they find there. And I think that's a plea I'm making to this House as we're looking forward, as we get into the future. The second thing is obviously that, and I think the matter was raised by Honorable Koech. There are jobs that you perform and you don't become popular. And I've been in that position. I was referred to as the most arrogant minister because I would refuse to increase the mileage for Parliament. Because that is how, that was what Treasury was expected to do. No, Mr. I'm only telling you, and I'm confessing and telling you. But, no, I'm not.
What is the point of order? What's the point of order?
Mr. Speaker, I served in the 10th Parliament. Honorable Kimunya was a very powerful minister. But to my knowledge, he has never served in the Parliamentary Service Commission that decides on mileage. So when he says, I have refused, that has never been. He was very powerful in the Kibaki government, for reasons all of us we know. But he had no powers in as far as the commission is concerned. He's out of order. Can he withdraw that he has set the mileage for us?
Proceed.
No, he was not arrogant. He was a humble man.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if my memory is correct, the Cap 5, I believe it was, the Salaries and the Parliamentary Salaries Act then actually required any adjustment to the mileage would have to be approved by the Treasury. And I believe the Parliamentary Service Commission did make those requests. And I actually did approve the mileages and even the increase of the mortgage. I had set those regulations to increase the mortgage to what it was and to even allow the mortgage could be used for renovation of buildings because not everyone was buying a house. But the point I'm making is that there are jobs that you appointed that require you to make some decisions that may not be very popular, and you cannot then be held responsible because of making those decisions. And I think we need to look at these people, and I think it's the same thing that we would be facing when you are looking at the DCI. There are people he may have taken to court. When you're vetting a former DPP, there are people he will have taken to court, not because of any personal, yeah? But so I just want to make that point that it's important when you're vetting people, we don't hold grudges because of the exigencies of the office and the job placed on them, and then we hold them responsible forever. But Mr. Speaker, I think that was the point I really wanted to say, and I believe these guys will represent us. They're good people. I know quite a number of them, and we can only wish them the best. But most importantly, I believe they have been put there not because they have failed in the other jobs, not because they are being kicked upstairs, as the Americans would say, but because they've been assessed and said, this is the people who best represent the interests of our country, and especially the heavy responsibility that has been placed on Sarah Serem, because if you look at the bilaterals and look at the financing issues between Kenya and China, China seems to be, it's a heavy responsibility, and we wish her the very best. So, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to raise that point and hope also that re-emphasize the point that there are also so many career diplomats who perhaps may also need to be considered in the second wave so that they don't seem that their career has been curtailed to just serving people who come from the outside, and they don't see any progression beyond themselves unless they retire and join us on this side in politics. I just want to highlight some of those things, and but be that as it may, I'm happy to support the report and congratulate the committee for a job well done. Thank you.
Honorable Soro.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And
I'm trying to balance counties.
Sorry.
Very well, Honorable TJ Kajwang. What's the point of order?
Mr. Speaker, I just want to request that because this is a lively debate and many of us would want to pinch in something, would we reduce our time, say, to 5 minutes a member, so that each of us gets something, particularly for obvious reasons, there is some people that we need to say something about.
Well, because you know the usual style of doing this and starting on number 97, I think I would only appeal to your own consciences to take on board what the Honorable TJ Kajwang has just said. Proceed, Honorable Soro.
Speaker, I think the Speaker's ruled 5 minutes, and I'll be quite brief. Mr. Speaker, I first want to appreciate you noticing me today. I mean, it's not very easy. I rise to support this motion, Mr. Speaker, with the following grounds. Mr. Speaker, I sat in the vetting committee that vetted all the ambassadors, all the nominees by His Excellency the President. And Mr. Speaker, more notable was the fact that there were much or so many speculations outside here, especially in regard to some nominees, and especially, Mr. Speaker, I'll appreciate if you protect me because I can't really concentrate. Because, Mr. Speaker, I need, I need attention, Mr. Speaker. Exactly, I need attention, Mr. Speaker. And the House should keep quiet. The House should keep quiet. Okay, let me proceed. I wanted your attention, Mr. Speaker, and the attention of the honorable members. Please.
Now, but you see, the Honorable Soro, just speak. You are speaking to history. The record there.
Okay.
Because it will be soon that you will also want to come and consult with me here.
Okay.
So, do I have to wait until...
Fine. I stand guided. Let me proceed. Mr. Speaker, of more concern was the opposition outside there by some of our colleagues before the vetting of one lady, Sarah Serem. Mr. Speaker, I need to pronounce myself on the same and say that it was extremely hard to find any fault, very, very hard to find any fault during the vetting. Mr. Speaker, we need not to allow ourselves as a House to be used to score, some settles, like some issues, to settle scores, sorry. We need to be very careful when we are handling issues of appointments. And I need to continue pronouncing myself. Mr. Speaker, Sarah Serem was not working alone in the commission. She was working with the other commissioners. And she was just a spokesperson of the commission. In as much as she never made a very interesting decision in regard to this House, Mr. Speaker, I tend to think, Mr. Speaker, that that is a strength that we need to take seriously. In my opinion, a strength of a person who can stand to what she believes in. This is a person who is going to represent this country, who believes in this country. She's going to represent this country in China, and she's going to sell it because she believes in this country. Mr. Speaker, I want to dissociate myself with the sentiments made by the majority leader that she's gone far away and we need to send her far away because she messed up here. Mr. Speaker, we are not, the ambassadors nominated here, Mr. Speaker, were nominated on merit. They were vetted by honorable members who are competent enough, who sit in those committees long hours. We were not doing that because we had some scores to settle with any person. And Mr. Speaker, we were not chasing Sarah Serem, and we are still not chasing her. I need to pronounce myself and say,
Honour members, the member must be heard. Even if you don't like his views. Yes. Please proceed. You are doing very well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We need to appreciate the strength of our men and women when they are given appointments by the state. When Dego Muhoro was given the appointment by His Excellency the President then, Mr. Speaker, he did a tremendous job, in as much as we might not agree with him, in as much as there are issues. I mean, we don't need to agree with a person when they are in some very controversial positions. And Mr. Speaker, in as much as people are disagreeing with Sarah Serem, we are not chasing her away. She's qualified, and we are not going. I do not know why, Honorable Joyce, you are so much, and that is your sister. But I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that we support the nomination of all these ambassadors because they are competent and not because they messed with us. Thank you very much.
Honorable Raso. You know, this county, I have to keep the counties in mind. I know which counties have spoken.
Thank you very much.
The gender are also represented in counties.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for this. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this approval motion by the House. Mr. Speaker, as a committee, and also with some of our experience as the Oversight Committee for Defense and also Foreign Affairs, I think sitting with those honorable members, both men and women, I think we came away to really understand that those who are men and women of honor, integrity, knowledge, and experience, that they will be able to bring to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also as diplomats and also to those missions. Mr. Speaker, I think moving away from just personalities, we need to really understand and agree that this is the face of Kenya out there. Will they represent us effectively? Will these individuals provide honor, integrity, and also the diplomatic take that we expect from them? I think, Mr. Speaker, generals have been appointed during this time and also before. I think they bring experience and honor, discipline, and also work ethics. And I think it's one of the greatest things that the Jubilee government has done, because these individuals have served their country in both command and also high military strategy, where they have worked both in their headquarters and at their units. And we believe that they are bringing something very positive to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, there are bilateral and multilateral missions. One of the speakers before said about the diplomats who are actually engaged out there. We need to consider that there are outsiders who are being appointed as diplomats, but there are also accomplished diplomats, like Ambassador Ogego. So we need to assign them to the right missions so that the officers who are working under these ambassadors and high commissioners do not struggle to do their job. Mr. Speaker, finally, I agree the appointment of Ambassador Ogego, an accomplished diplomat. But the executive must rethink that position. Saudi Arabia, the leader of majority has said something. It is a pure Islamic state where the cities of Mecca and Medina, the access is only allowed to those members of the Muslim faith. When our ambassador out there is denied access to make connection, to have access to government, and also to sign deals, then I think his activities will be hampered. We ask the executive, they must rethink that position. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I beg to support.
Gender, Wanga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I really congratulate very much the nominees for ambassador to the various stations. I specifically would like to congratulate Honorable Patrick Cornell Odero Ahenda, aka Paddy Medi, who is from Homa Bay County and a product of the handshake. So I'm really happy for him and hope that he does a good job in Qatar. But Mr. Speaker, in the interest of the matter of time raised by Honorable TJ, let me just make a few remarks and also congratulate Honorable Benja Langat. You know, on the matter of appointment of Ms. Sarah Serem, you know, I have been thinking about the speech I would make on the floor of this house if she is appointed to any. I've been thinking about it since the day she said that members of parliament, if given sitting allowances, will ask for standing allowance, walking allowance, sleeping allowance, waking up allowance. I have been thinking about it since that day. Mr. Speaker, as I served together with you in the commission, the Parliamentary Service Commission of the 11th Parliament, it would take us 6 months to even get an appointment to see the SRC Commission. Despite you writing several letters, I really have meditated on this matter. In fact, the scathing speech I had prepared was only toned down by when my pastor called me and preached about forgiveness and this spirit of the handshake. This is the only reason I have reflected, I have meditated, and I have finally said forgiveness and letting go and non-vindictiveness is part of the game out here. So, Mr. Speaker, with a heavy heart, but having released her, I also support her to go to China, but really to send a very strong message to whoever else takes such a position. Let us discuss. Nobody wants to have huge salaries or anything. We just want to be fair to everybody and listen to everybody so that we all move forward together with mutual respect. So, Sarah, wherever you are, go in peace. And we hope you represent our country well. But I really had to speak on this matter because I have prepared for it for a long time. But thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Honorable Barire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to also add my voice of support to this motion. And Mr. Speaker, let me begin by saying, like everybody else, I think in the spirit of forgiveness, we'll let Serem move on and go to China and serve our nation well. But more importantly, if you look at this list of 9 people, there's only one woman, and it is Sarah Serem. So because she's a woman like me, and I know she has what it takes, I really support her to go and do what is best. But of course, I'm sure she has heard the concerns raised by various members that have spoken before me. And going forward in future, she'll be in a better position to treat members of parliament better, not just by raising a salary, because that wasn't the main thing. It is the statement she made that demeaned us and made us feel insulted. But otherwise, I know she has what it takes, and no doubt she meets the qualifications, and therefore I support her. Madam, I don't know why today I keep saying Madam Speaker. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I think it's because Jessica sat there yesterday quite a bit. But Mr. Speaker, also, let me say I'm happy that the President continues to have faith in politicians even when they leave this house. And I've always said that the worst thing we can do is to make politicians, once they leave this house, to look like they are unable to do any other role. But I have seen the president take up able politicians into big offices, into diplomacy, and they have served very well. So I'm very happy to see Ahenda there, who I served with in this house for about 4 years. He came in a by-election, and I know he's well able. But I'm even more happy about Benjamin Langat, the former chair of Finance Committee, Mr. Speaker. The Honorable Langat performed very well in that committee. You'll all agree with me. And he took his work seriously in this house. And although in the evening he liked to enjoy what men like to enjoy, that never affected his work, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I'm happy that we have the Honorable Langat there, and I believe you serve very well. Finally, let me also add my voice to what was said earlier by a member who talked about really appreciating the work of men and women who serve in the forces. And I'm really happy to see that the Lieutenant General Doita and Ondieki, who have now both been appointed, and I believe that their discipline is what has helped them to rise to the top. You'll all agree with me, to get to the top of this military career is not an easy thing. It's not a walk in the park. The fact that they have gotten there means that they truly can serve this country even better in diplomacy. And I really wish them well in their new role, because this one now is more diplomacy than orders, and I believe they can do it very, very well. Finally, may I also say I'm happy to see Muhoro, Ndegwan Muhoro. We all know the role he played while he was at DCI. Obviously, when you're in certain positions, as Honorable Kemunya said, there are people who will not be happy because you'll do certain jobs that don't make certain people happy, but he did his job well. And also Manoa Espisu for the great work he did when he was the spokesperson in State House. And I'm happy that he passed this vetting. And therefore, may I add my voice finally to support all the 9 candidates and say that they really will serve this country well. With those few remarks, I beg to support.
Kitui Central.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've actually been waiting for this opportunity, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me also join my colleagues in supporting these appointments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, looking through the people who have been appointed and listening to the chair of the committee, I have no doubts that we got some competent Kenyans here, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, the more I listen to the members contribute to this motion, the more I ask myself some fundamental questions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you look at most of these countries which these officers are going to, and you consider what we call balance of trade, Mr. Speaker, you realize that, Mr. Speaker, the balance of trade is actually not in favor of Kenya. And one of the key responsibilities of ambassadors is to make sure that they promote trade between Kenya and those other countries. And the other important responsibility is what we call promoting international and regional cooperation. But, Mr. Speaker, I really would wish to see a situation whereby, even as a committee chaired by my friend, Ole Kato, that you continue monitoring these individuals when they take up the positions, so that at the end of the day we have very clear outputs in terms of improving international cooperation, and the other, which will be very important, is improving the balance of trade. Because I think we are not doing well. And I think now international relationships have shifted, actually. It's more of trading than just getting grants and loans. So to me, that is quite critical, that these individuals also play a key role in promoting trade between Kenya and those countries where they have been posted. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is looking at the composition. I think there's a fair distribution in terms of military, in terms of public service. But I want to emphasize a point which was raised by Honorable Kemunya, that let's also, as a House, encourage the executive also to promote those who are in the system, so that if I was served as a deputy ambassador for 10 years or 5 years, I can also get a chance of also being promoted to become an ambassador. Because when we go out there, Mr. Speaker, We find some of these officers and they tell you, I've been serving as a deputy for a number of years, and when they see the likes of me and others who are in this house coming just from parliament and you become their boss, it discourages them. So I would really plead the house that we also encourage executive to give us career civil servants who have also served in the foreign ministry. Last but not least, Mr. Speaker, I think I also want to put my spur into the works of Sarah Serem. Really, I think she's a competent and qualified lady. But to me, what surprised me most is the issue of academic qualifications. You know the reason why we are placed as members of parliament, the reason why we are placed at position almost 46 is because they say this house, in terms of our academic standards, we are very low, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, I want to say this. This is the only arm of government. This is the only arm of government where you find somebody who is just at Form 4 level, somebody who is most even in class 8 level, and PhDs sitting in the same place discussing matters of national importance. When you go to the judiciary, you find the judges, when they sit in their boardrooms, they are all the same level. When you go to the executive, you find directors and head of departments, they are all the same level academically. So when you say you can't place a member of parliament at the top there because of academic qualifications, I think that has been unfair to this house. And those who are taking over from this commissioner should realize that this is a house of leadership. When Kenyans elect leaders, they consider other factors other than academic. And on those bases, there is what we call the F-range. So I think our rating is unfair completely. When you place members of parliament at 46, we are the appointing authority now, we must approve her to go to China, and then she thinks we are not important when it comes to placement of our position. So, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to say I support, but I think those lessons we have learned should be taken over by the new commissioners so that members of parliament are placed in the right position in terms of hierarchy. With those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support.
Now, you see, honourable members, we must also be alive to the fact the provisions of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act that because members are speaking, then they take off. Then who is going to do the approval? Who will do the approval? Honourable Gikaria, what is your point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I arise on point of order number 95. Yes. And this, Honorable Speaker, I rise on order, standing order number 95, Mr. Speaker. And going by what you have just said, Honorable Speaker, I seek your indulgence to protect me because they are the ones who are going to make a decision. Honorable Speaker, I arise on point of order number 95. Honorable Speaker, from the advert that if we don't get the quorum to be able for you to be able to put the question, and yes, if we continue like this, then we will not have numbers to be able to pass, and as per the Act, then by midnight, these people will stand nominated. And since everybody seems to agree, yes. Honorable Speaker, I want to request you to ask the mover to be able to rise and to put, Mr. Speaker, we ask the mover to be able to be asked to reply, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, the issue has been raised by the Honourable Gikaria that given the circumstances, the requirements, and today being the last day, that I call the mover to reply. And they have put the question that the mover be called upon to reply. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as the contrary opinion say no? No. The ayes have it. Mover.
Mr. Speaker, I want to, just for correction, a correction. Just in the report, Mr. Speaker, Ambassador Peter Nicholas Oginga Ogengo, date of birth is indicated 1978. Just for records, it is 1957. And Mr. Speaker, I beg to reply.
Again, also, you need to have made this.
Order members, order members, order members, order members, order members. I put the question that taking into consideration the recommendations of the Departmental Committee on Defense and Foreign Relations in their report on the vetting of the nominees for approval as High Commissioners and Ambassadors, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, August 7, 2018, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 132, Clause 2, Paragraph E of the Constitution, this House approves the appointment of the following persons as High Commissioners and Ambassadors. 1. Francis Degwa Muhoro, High Commissioner, Malaysia. 2. Manoa Esipiso, High Commissioner, United Kingdom. 3. Honorable Benjamin Lagat, High Commissioner to Namibia. 4. Sarah Serem, Ambassador to China. 5. Lieutenant General Samuel Thoita, Ambassador to Israel. 6. Honorable Patrick Cornell Ondero Ahenda, Ambassador to Qatar. 7. Ambassador Peter Nicholas Oginga Ogego, Ambassador to Saudi Arabia. 8. Lieutenant General Johnson Kimani Ondieki, Ambassador to Turkey. And 9. Mr. Christopher Karumba Mburu, Ambassador to South Sudan. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as the contrary opinion say no? No. The ayes have it.
Order number 14, the Urban Areas and Cities Amendment Bill, Senate Bill number 4 of 2017, second reading.
Mr. Speaker, I really want to indulge you that, the following bills, the chairs of the various committees, some of them have not tabled their reports, and I really want you to defer them. The one on the urban areas and cities, the one on the county government amendments, the SACCO, and of course, Mr. Speaker, last night at the House Business Committee, we have agreed that the finance bill will be slated for debate the week beginning 21st.
Which one is?
I've said the urban areas and cities, the county government amendment bill from the Senate, the SACCO, and of course the finance bill, which the committee is yet to table the report. I really want us to step down and put them for next week because the chairs have asked for time to interrogate the Senate bills and then file a report to the House.
Well, so that, what happens to business appearing as number 17?
Number 17, I think, is a sugar, and I'm not seeing the chairs of the report of the Joint Committee on the sugar, and of course, Honorable Makali, I think, will agree with me. Like, we never anticipated that we'll have 30 minutes. A very important report. We wanted to direct that it be the first item on the order paper tomorrow afternoon. So that those who have eaten sugar, those who have not eaten sugar, those who are in one way or the other connected to sugar can sleep well and wake up tomorrow and come and debate in the afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Because it's a very emotive thing, and members, we don't want members to accuse you as our speaker and the leadership, those who are sitting here, that we have other business. We are doing something behind their back. So let everybody prepare and be in the house at 2:30, Speaker, and upon your direction.
Well, he did, of course, without the joint chairs being present in the House. Obviously, there will be nothing that can be done. They are the ones to move the reports. So we can only take it out of the order paper or stand it down. But as requested, it be the first business on the order paper, tomorrow being order number 8. If it can start that way, I think maybe that would help as many members as possible to express themselves one way or other on that very important report. In the circumstances, one of members there being no other business, time being 38 minutes past 6, and there being no other business, the House stands adjourned till tomorrow, Thursday, 9th of August at 2:30 p.m.